Now I have lost the slide. Laura, Maggie, can we see the slide? Although I can see that we're live on YouTube, so we'll get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on day 3 of the Centre for Homelessness Impact Forum. And today we've been exploring homelessness across the devolved nations. And this session will very much focus on Scotland. So thank you for joining us. I'll introduce the panel shortly before we have a pre-recorded message from one of our MSPs for you. And then we'll open up to see what questions you have for us. So my name's Mark Kelvin. I'm a recently appointed new post, which I hope to tell you a bit more about later on, is the director for the Glasgow Alliance to End Homelessness. So we've set ourselves the challenge of completely ending homelessness in Glasgow by 2030. So quite an exciting collective approach to ending homelessness in the city. We're also joined by Maggie and Laura today. So Maggie, if I could hand over to you, please, to introduce yourself first of all.
Thanks, Mark, and hello everyone. It's great to be here with you this afternoon. My name's Maggie. I work for an organisation called Homeless Network Scotland. So our interest is in the kind of the policy and systems changes that we think are needed to end homelessness in Scotland. And as a network, we create opportunities for everyone to just connect, to learn together and to act on what works and what matters.
Thank you, Maggie. Laura, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Laura. I'm a school leader. I'm a writer. I'm a keynote speaker and disability campaigner, and also have lived experience of homelessness.
Thank you, Laura. So before we come on with some short kind of 5-minute inputs from each of us, we've got a message for you from Eleanor Whitman. So I believe that's about to start.
I'm Elena Whittam and I'm the new MSP for Carrickcumnock and Doon Valley, and I'm also currently still the Deputy Leader of East Ayrshire Council and Cabinet Member for Housing and Communities. Until January, I was a housing lead and community spokesperson for the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, and this led to me being co-chair of the Homelessness Prevention and Strategy Group with the then Housing Minister Kevin Stewart. I was recently involved in the panel convened to look at creating a homelessness prevention duty in Scotland and contributed to the Housing to 2040 and the work of the Social Renewal Advisory Board, which was created to be a catalyst for change post-pandemic. For a decade, I worked for Women's Aid and developed a keen understanding of the gendered nature of homelessness. Before that, I was part of North Ayrshire Council's homeless team, and I also worked for a Rough Sleepers Initiative project, which supported young people aged 16 to 24. I myself have been homeless twice, with one of those times as a result of fleeing external violence with my son, who was only 1 year old at the time. And I'm keenly aware of the feelings of powerlessness that accompany homelessness. Many thanks to the Centre for their invitation to contribute today, and I'm so sorry that I can't be there to participate in what I'm sure is going to be a really lively discussion. So, collective resilience is a very apt title for this year's forum after the last 14 months we have all lived through. Prior to the pandemic, we were already forging ahead with trying to change the housing landscape in Scotland with our More Homes initiative, ending the right to buy, and with our collective ambitious Ending Homelessness Together action plan. All of this has been born out of 2 decades worth of work to make Scotland a world leader in homelessness rights. We had been responding and contributing to the Scottish Government's Housing to 2040 strategy. And even if I was really frustrated at the time, I believed that it was absolutely right to pause its publication until we could review it through a COVID lens. But let's pause for a moment and consider the last set of published stats on homelessness in Scotland, which were taken mid-pandemic. In the 6 months between April and September 2020, there were nearly 17,000 homeless applications and just about 13.5 households assessed as homeless. The number of households assessed as homeless decreased by 12% in that time compared to the 6 months prior, but we know that this reduction will have been due to the impact of the Scottish Government's protections against evictions on preventing homelessness during the pandemic. And we're now facing a growing sense of urgency to ensure we don't see a huge spike in evictions as protections are reduced. The number of single males who are assessed as homeless makes up nearly half of all homeless households. Females under 24 are slightly more likely to become homeless than males under 24. For both of these stats, there will be underlying causation that needs to be explored as we continue on our prevention duty. Nearly half of all homeless applications in 2019-20 were due to relationship breakdown or being asked to leave, and 13% were due to disputes within the household that were violent or abusive. This category, in my opinion, does not currently reflect the new gold standard domestic abuse laws, including coercive control, and I have a strong belief that we need to renew and continue specialist domestic abuse training right across Scotland to help understand the real nature of abuse, the gendered reality of women's precariousness in housing, but also the wider sense of equalities and their intersectionality. Again, this is absolutely crucial work being taken forward, and I would encourage everyone today to see how their organisations can include a deep dive into how different groups of people are affected by homelessness in different but collective ways. With regards to domestic abuse, the Chartered Institute of Housing, Scottish Women's Aid and COSLA have created guidance to ensure that social landlords can respond robustly to the parallel pandemic of domestic abuse in light of COVID-19, where staying at home, which we were told to do, actually placed so many in danger. And the resulting blockage in the housing letting systems meant that people who were being abused had even more limited in their ability to leave and the choices than they had before. If your organisation does not currently have a domestic abuse policy for housing, I would really encourage you to take a look at that today. The last stats also show that we have approximately 14,000 households in temporary accommodation in Scotland and just shy of 8,000 children. We need to take a second to think about the fact that nearly 7,000 of those households are made up of single men. And the trend that has seen a massive increase in the number of one-person households in the last 2 decades. We're on course to see over 1 million of us living in single households in Scotland, and we need to understand the dynamics of this trend and the implications for the house types and indeed the community amenities that we need as we go forward. People are able to leave relationships now easier. People are choosing to have a partner but keep their own autonomy in their own house. And we have the positive position of people who are living much longer, but this can also mean living alone after their partner passes away. The primary tenure for households in Scotland is still owner occupation. About 14% of households are now in the private rented sector, which has doubled in the last 10 years, and 24% of us still live in social housing. We need to take a moment to contrast this. So if we can think about 3 council areas, Edinburgh's got 59% owner occupied, 14% social housing, and a large 25% in the private rented sector. Whilst East Ayrshire, my own local authority, we've got 62% owner occupied, 30%, which is a large number, living in social housing, and a small 7% private let market. By comparison, nearly 80% of East and Bartonshire are owner occupiers, and the other 20% split between social and private rented sectors. So we can see that this absolutely means there's enormous pressures in some places on social housing and a big dependence on the private rented sector, and that can often lead to expensive median rent, as in Edinburgh. But conversely, in my own local authority of East Ayrshire, we've got a shrinking population in many communities with demand centred on our biggest town. 30% of homes are socially rented, and we have a really inexpensive private rented sector. So this led us to taking part in the Centres End It With Evidence pilot, and we're now aware of how we can use our private rented sector in a really positive way to help us move towards our rapid rehousing goals. With the recently published Housing to 2040 strategy, we can see we really need to take stock and consider the vision for housing over the longer time frame. This vision needs to put housing firmly at the centre of all of our other objectives for people in Scotland, tackling poverty and inequality, creating and supporting jobs, ensuring we meet our energy efficiency and fuel poverty targets, tackling the climate emergency, and crucially, making sure we have connected, cohesive communities to live in that meet our needs. We absolutely must start to pull all of these golden threads together. How do we call on every part of the public sector to recognise how they can play their part in preventing homelessness? Housing alone can't fix it. I've been repeating that mantra for 20 years now. We have far too many people that are dying of entirely preventable drugs deaths. Many of these individuals have been known to housing and the wider services for decades, with far too many failed tenancies and notes decrying their failure to engage. This must change with Housing First, where we as a nation prioritise wraparound support that has all of the services engaged and ensuring that people feel valued and supported. They didn't fail. We failed them. We need to use the blueprints set out in Housing to 2040 and the If Not Now When output from the Social Renewal Advisory Board and the recommendations from the Prevention Review Group to drive forward real change from the grassroots level up, driven by communities who have a real say in what their neighbourhoods look and feel like. But we also need the policymakers who have all the evidence and the data to help create national policy to build another 70,000 homes for social rent that will enable us to deliver locally tailored solutions that fit in with local robust community planning partnership plans that are driven by the shared goal to finally end homelessness in Scotland once and for all. We need to understand how sustainable communities need a mix of housing types and tenures across depopulating rural constituencies that are often hit by increased second home ownership and short-term lets, and also how the private rented sector plays its part in what national and local governments must do to regulate the sector more and to support it to drive rapid rehousing plans. It's time to be bold, time to be innovative, and to use this crucial moment in history to ensure that housing plays its key role in shaping the Scotland of tomorrow. Thanks once again, and I'm so sorry I can't be there today to take part in what I know is going to be a dynamic discussion.
Great. So there's one line that stood out and is particularly pertinent with our collective resilience theme today. Housing alone can't fix it. So we'll keep that theme running through the next presentations, I'm sure. And I can see some comments coming in. Do please continue to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen there, and we'll come to those after we've heard from Maggie and Laura and start the discussion. But for now, we're going to hand over to Maggie. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I was nodding my way through Eleanor's presentation there. There was just so much to think about, so much to agree with, and it's great she's made her way into Parliament this year. I think she's just going to make such a huge impact there. Best place for her. So my mission over the next less than 5 to 8 minutes is to both keep to that time and also slow down a Glaswegian accent for a UK-wide audience. So I'm going to do my best to achieve both, but apologies if I fall down on either. So as Mark has already said, the theme of this week's forum is collective resilience. For me, collectivism is a word that has just taken on a whole new meaning over the last 15 months or so. And I think many of us think that we've always worked well together, but I think we also now have different expectations, don't we? And that leads us to connect and to collect in a new way. I think there's also no doubt that we have a better idea of what's possible and how quickly when all sectors and partners just leave everything at the door and come together. Because I think what a number of us feel now, what's happened over the last period, is that we've kind of all seen behind the curtain and there's no going back. I think rough sleeping in Scotland, the fact that that was almost ended, almost overnight, is a prime example of that. So to give my view from Scotland, if I were to very quickly describe the homelessness landscape, it would probably be in 3 parts. First, a very committed policy environment, strong rights to housing and support. Secondly, we have relatively low levels of rough sleeping, and that's always been the case before, as well as the situation that we're in now. And third, a strong collaboration ethic, I think, within and across the different sectors, and that includes a really strong focus on lived experience leadership and learning from people closest to the issues on the ground. Our key challenges, though, are broadly, I think, in 4 parts. First, I think this is common across the country, isn't it? Making sure that we have the supply and access to housing in the places that people really want to live. Secondly, more specific, I think, to Scotland, is our stubborn over-reliance on temporary accommodation and the length of time that people stay there, with not all of it suitable. And there's a whole history that's triggered that would be a whole presentation in itself. I think third, changing the conditions that create homelessness, poverty reduction, especially as the primary driver of homelessness, really inspiring debate in the Scottish Parliament on that theme just yesterday. And the motion that passed set out a range of ambitions, each of which would directly contribute to preventing homelessness right upstream. And probably the final key challenge is what people sometimes call the implementation gap, that making great policy deliver on the ground for the people that it was intended to, making it work every time for every person. And that needs much more focus on implementation and probably more value given to perseverance, to resilience, and to scaling up what works. The pandemic, I think, has magnified all of that. It's strengthened what's good and also made the challenges harder. But they do remain roughly the same themes. So now what it feels like we need is a range of efforts and on many fronts to keep building from what's strong and get a much better handle on all those challenges that remain. So importantly, this idea of collectivism runs right through the heart of all of that. And my current understanding of collectivism in relation to the brief that we're talking about today is in three parts. Firstly, collective resilience, the theme of this week, the many different discussions that have been had around the way we bond, cope and support each other and the benefits that have. Secondly, about collective leadership, that connecting diverse leaders with different insights and experiences, including first-hand experience, and that this matters because each of us have very different spheres of influence, different social and professional networks that we can connect with and influence, and that's what's going to help join all the dots. And thirdly, collective impact, that some problems just present as too big for any individual organisation or sector to solve alone, that all of us only sees one part of the picture and that we get a fuller view and better impact together. So just finally, just a final couple of minutes, I'm just kind of reflecting on whether these types of words are just new words for old ideas, because collaboration and connectedness is of course nothing new, and our sector has plenty of examples of great partnerships achieving great results. But there is something really special starting to emerge in Scotland among the people and organisations who care about homelessness. And this was all taking place before lockdown, and in many cases just been strengthened and accelerated during it. And it's just about pushing collaboration harder, more focused, higher expectations, and probably a bit better behaved too. So there are now a number of new structures that are underpinned by those themes. Some quick examples that we've been drawing inspiration from in Scotland at national level, the Everyone Home Collective, which is a third and academic sector collective of 35 organisations. We've also got All In for Change, which is a team driven by people with lived experience of homelessness and those with frontline responsibilities, who, as well as developing their own programmes of work, are part of decision-making structures at government level. Both of those structures provide a strong, really informed infrastructure to connect with the public sector too, and as strategic partners, not just providers or users of services. And then of course the Glasgow Alliance to End Homelessness, the first of its kind. Mark's here and there's nothing I can say that he wouldn't say better, but it's incredibly special and one to watch. So just to end, from me, like many here today and across this week of discussions, I believe that ending homelessness is possible, no matter how tiring that gets for people to hear and to say sometimes, but only if we connect, if we learn from evidence, from each other's experiences, and continue to work together, fully focused in a collective way on what works and what matters. And then when there's so much that really does matter as a sector, we really do owe it to each other to stop spending time on what doesn't matter. So that's me done, and thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maggie. And yes, I'm conscious that I keep teasing the Glasgow Alliance to End Homelessness. I was going to save my little input until we've heard from Laura, because I think it will nicely demonstrate the thread of this collective approach of all the things that you spoke about there. And I completely agree, it is something very special and something that I'm conscious in public health, in any social justice agenda. You're right, Maggie, everybody's always looking for new ideas, and sometimes it is new language for old ideas. And so when I speak to colleagues about this new approach, I'm conscious they might be thinking in the back of their mind, oh, here we go again, something new. Why is this going to be different? So from hearing your input, from hearing Eleanor and Laura, hopefully we'll be able to pull out some of those things and share a bit about the Alliance as well. But excellent, I'm sure that stimulated a lot of questions, and we'll come back to you with some challenging questions for you in 10 to 15 minutes or so. Thank you. Laura, really interested to hear your experience then and reflections on what you've heard so far.
No pressure, Mark, on, on me holding the threads together. I can't promise that I'm going to do that. My name is Laura McConnell. I'm a originally a primary school teacher. That's my training background. I've worked in the primary sector for 15 years. I've also worked in the additional support needs sector. And as of August, I'm going to be working in the secondary sector. So I'm going to be one of the rare educators of Scotland that will have had experience in all three types of schools. I'm involved in a lot of disability campaigning and have spoken around the world, in America, in India, Australia, all over Europe, all about disability. But today is the first time I have ever spoken about homelessness, and I'm here because of a beautiful woman called Hannah Green, who I met on Twitter, and she encouraged me to be 10% braver and to talk about my own experience. So I'm really glad to be here, and I hope that I can fulfill what Mark just said and what all of you want. I am disabled, I am autistic, I have ADHD, I'm dyslexic, I also have hypermobility, and as a child I found life very difficult, but also I think my family found me very difficult, and I'm okay to own that. I was, as a child, I wasn't diagnosed immediately, but I was diagnosed with a conduct disorder. Oppositional defiant disorder, in fact. And do you know what I was? I was oppositional, I was defiant, and it was very, very difficult. And living with me was hard. I had many frequent meltdowns that involved smashing my head off of walls. It's a miracle that my face is intact, if not my brain. I self-harmed quite severely and didn't sleep probably for the first 16 years of my life, and I'm now 38 and I still don't sleep. Around about the age of 35, decided that actually there was something in what my parents said about me, and we now have a good relationship. But as I say, I'm now 38, and obviously that took a bit of time. Age of 16, and if you know anything about the Scottish education system, I was a January birthday, so I turned 16 in January. I sat my hires in the May, and I left home on the day of my last hire, and I spent the entire summer couch surfing, sofa surfing, and living with people who were unsuitable, shall we say, living with people who took a lot of drugs, and people who were not great people for young women to be involved with, until I went to college in the October. And then I had a sort of uneasy relationship with college and university up until I was 21. I experienced sexual assault a number of times in between that, and I had a baby when I was 21. Now, in my circles, having a baby when you were 21 was kind of middle-aged, but I had a baby when I was 21. He's now 16, he's wonderful. But at that time, his father left me when I was 4 months pregnant and hasn't been seen since. If you know him, please tell him where I am. He owes me a check. But I haven't seen him since, and I was left with this baby, and the choice was go home to your parents, which they would have quite happily had me go home to, or strike out on your own. So I tried going home to my parents, and it was really very difficult. If you are disabled, particularly if you are autistic or you have ADHD or you have conduct disorders and mental health conditions, and the family breakdown has caused you to move out of the house, then those old habits don't die hard despite there being a baby involved. And we tried that for a while, and it became very impossible. And I remember taking my pram with my 2-month-old baby into a homeless office in, well, I'm just calling it a homeless office, whatever it was, in Glasgow. because I'm from East Dunbartonshire, but I straddled the East Dunbartonshire and Glasgow divide, and I took it into our office in Glasgow, and he took one look at me and thought, you're a girl from Milngavie, and he told me, I'll put you at the top of a high rise, and the person that is next door to you might have just come out of prison and might be a paedophile, and that is a direct quote. And I obviously decided that living with my horrible parents, are not horrible, but living with my horrible parents was better than living at the top of a high rise next door to a paedophile that had just come out of prison. And I went back to East Dunbartonshire, and I went to register as homeless with them, and I was told, well, you know, it'll take 15 years for you to get a council house in East Dunbartonshire because they're all sold off. And I was put on their homeless list. And for 2 years, I bounced around friends, bounced around boyfriends, unsuitable boyfriends. I have never slept rough, luckily. I did stay sometimes in units with my child, and eventually was given a placement, I suppose, in Lennoxtown, and I didn't think it was suitable, and I had enough, and I phoned a counsellor. And after phoning the counsellor made everything okay. And within a week, I got a flat in Auchinnairn. Not the greatest place, but I loved it for 7 years of my life. And it really put home to me that had I known that I could have phoned the counsellor before, maybe had I had the resources, maybe had I had that information, could my situation have been different before? So really what I wanted to say today is that there's a lot of issues with the disability community, some of whom don't quite have the capacity that I do, that have gone to university, are able to advocate for themselves, are able to articulate for themselves, are able to fill in the benefits forms for themselves, or even know who to access in that way. And I think that this is an unexplored area of the homeless sector that really needs to be addressed more. And as a professional who puts on very professional clothing every day and stands in front of a school of 1,900 pupils who will never, well, maybe they will, but they will never know that I have had that sort of struggle. I think that there are issues that we need to address with the disability sector and with young single mothers, particularly where there is that intersection. And hopefully I have thrown up some questions that might intersect with what Mark had planned. So thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you for sharing your story, Laura. And if that's 10% braver, I dread to think what 25% braver looks like. And I'm grateful for, I apologize, I've forgotten the woman's name who encouraged you to be 10% braver, but I'll need to follow her on Twitter. You have to drop a handle.
Hannah Green, she's actually in our little group.
She's here. Thanks for that, Hannah. And Laura, there's an opportunity as well to drop your Twitter handle if you like to invite followers to continue to follow your story. And I think you did exactly what you were afraid of doing, which was following that thread through. And I think you summed it up really nicely, that one person can make everything okay. The system isn't full of people trying not to support people. The majority of people working within the system are trying to make everything okay, but for various reasons, and data protection is one that we hear, caseload's another one that we hear, they're unable to do it. And that's one thing that we're looking at with the Glasgow Alliance to End Homelessness. So I don't want to take up too much time because we've got about 20 minutes now to open up for questions. But just as a brief introduction into the Alliance, we're the first of our kind, certainly in Scotland, to bring together strategy and partners to deliver all homelessness services across the city. So until now, Glasgow has had 68 registered social landlords to deal with, various third sector partners and others. And the commissioning and procurement obligations that go with a governance framework of a city and local authority and public money that size. So the brave decision that Glasgow City Council and the Health and Social Care Partnership have made is to contract that budget out to an alliance, which is formed of 10 organisations, including equal partners with the city, the HSCP, 7 partner providers, third sector organisations and housing associations, and people with lived or living experience of homelessness. Now, one of the factors that make us unique is that we operate with unanimous decision making. So everything that we're going to do has to be agreed unanimously with people with lived experience and across those partnership organizations. And we're very early days in terms of becoming operational, although we've been formed for a while now, just before the pandemic. That's obviously slowed down what we've been able to achieve operationally. But we're starting to look at how can we contract and procure in a way that encourages collective resilience, collective collaboration, that breaks down competition, allows all of these organizations to do what they want to do, which is make everything okay for the people that they work with. So if you're interested in finding out more about the Alliance, we're so new that our website is just one page at the moment, but it's glasgowalliance.org. You're very welcome to visit that page or contact myself. I'll drop my email, actually. I'll give that to the Impact Forums team and make sure that comes out with any post-event literature today. I'd be very happy to keep you up to date with progress and sign you up to the newsletter that we'll be producing. But we've already had some questions in. So to start with, we've got a question for you, Laura, if you'd like to take yourself off of mute. And I'm going to scroll back and just look for the question here. It's recognizing that it's really important to hear the voices and views of people who have experience of homelessness. And the question is, how can we do it without asking individuals to talk about things that are uncomfortable for them or that they want to leave behind? So if I come to you first, I'd be interested to hear that, but I know that Maggie, through her experience of shared leadership, will also have a good view on that.
I feel that very pertinently, as I say, that today is the first time I've ever spoken in public about anything to do with homelessness, and it wasn't that lovely Hannah didn't twist my arm up my back. It just happened to come at the right time, but it's something that is a delicate experience, particularly I think for those who have moved on, and particularly for those of us who have maybe gone through university, gone into professions, got mortgages, and then I suppose left that life behind, but our experiences and are still very pertinent. And I think that there is a whole world of homeless people and people with past homeless experiences out there who are scared to talk about that and are scared to maybe talk about what they think will influence. And I think that having maybe more opportunities to anonymously contribute experiences, to put it out there that people who have homelessness experiences can and who may not still be homeless and who maybe aren't willing to admit that to their community and to talk about it to their community, can still contribute to services and can still contribute their ideas. And I think that I think that would be quite a valid way of gathering voices, gathering experiences, particularly where there is intersections, not just from disability, but where there's racial intersections, where there is intersections of like religious identity in communities that aren't always open to speaking publicly about situations that we might describe as uncomfortable. I think that having more opportunities to contribute anonymously even would be very positive.
Great, thank you, Laura. Maggie, I wonder if you have anything to add to that through your experience with Homeless Network Scotland.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks, Laura. Just adding my thanks to the people in the chat for the kind of intro you gave. It was just really incredible, and just so much to take away from that. So I hope we can connect after this as well. I mean, I guess from my perspective, I mean, the idea and the value of lived experience, people that have been there, that have walked the walk, just have a unique insight that the rest of us generally don't. I mean, we just heard some of that, and that without that unique insight, we will continue to make the same mistakes, and we won't achieve the type of impact, the type of ambitions that we all share. It just helps us go further, reality checks our thinking, and it just keeps things right. Whether that's listening to stories and just being able to plot the missed opportunities that can help you look at things in a kind of systems way, or whether it's just drawing from the strengths and skills of people that have been there and enabling those to be used within your work plans to tackle homelessness. One of the examples that I could quickly give is what we describe as a platform for lived experience. And we do that because we quite deliberately resist the idea that you give people with experience of homelessness a voice. Everybody has a voice. What people lack is a platform often. So what we describe we do is create the platform for people to use their voice or to use their skills and talents. And we do that through a structure in Scotland that's called All In for Change. It's a team of 30 people closest to the issue of homelessness on the ground through their lived experience of it. And it also includes people with frontline responsibilities. And that's a deliberate kind of partnership, because what a big part of that is trying to achieve is reducing that gap between people that provide services and people that use services, and just trying to make it much more about all of us and less about this distinction between those two different parts. So it's a useful structure for enabling that change team connect directly with the decision-making structures, so the kind of planning structures for homelessness in Scotland. So they have a couple of seats on the table of a planning group that was chaired by the Housing Minister until the election, and we'll find out how that will be chaired going forward. So connected in at policy level, but also at a much more grassroots level, they are facilitating a national conversation right now in Scotland, which is through a number of different ways inviting the views, insights and experiences of people that are currently living it and other people that are working within the homelessness sector.
Great, thank you. We've got lots of questions coming in, and there's a question here, Maggie, I wonder if you could talk to, it's specifically around your comment about our reliance on temporary accommodation and that staying stubbornly high. And it's probably worth us being explicit that the standards of temporary accommodation in Scotland have been raised, and that includes a cap on the time that people can spend in unsuitable accommodation. So I wonder if you could tell us what more can be done to solve that stubborn high reliance.
Yeah, absolutely. And the kind of over-reliance in temporary accommodation, which I think is interesting in Scotland's history toward ending homelessness, was an unintended consequence of the universal right to housing that people were given over a decade ago. So what that effectively meant was local authorities had to make sure that housing was available for everyone in a way that they hadn't before. That was from 2012. And in the absence of the appropriate supply of settled housing at all times in all areas, then this over-reliance on the use of temporary accommodation was really built up over those years. The Scottish homelessness the homelessness policy context, it also means that people have a right to temporary accommodation until settled accommodation is made available. So it's a slightly different policy context as well. But all those things meant that people were increasingly put in temporary accommodation more and more, was brought in. And indeed people were spending a longer period in it. The whole policy objective in Scotland about rapid rehousing is to fix our central problem in Scotland, which is about this use of temporary accommodation. What should be said is that actually the majority of temporary accommodation in Scottish context is pretty good. It's social housing, it's community-based and it's furnished. But there also is a lot of temporary accommodation that isn't good and it's unsuitable. It's owned by private owners and the quality of the standards aren't good as well. So a bit of a mixed bag. So I think the challenge will need to be, as we reduce the use of temporary accommodation, has to be hand in hand with increasing access to settled accommodation and making sure that we don't throw out the good temporary accommodation, but that we do it in an order that ensures a safe transition that holds quality centre within all that.
Thanks, Maggie. And you can see, Laura, from the story that you shared in your experience, the difference that suitable accommodation would have made, not the option of home or the top floor. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Somebody's just asking about the Alliance a little bit more. So if I may, just a couple of minutes to talk to what the Alliance is hoping to achieve in the next few months with some examples. The examples, I don't know if they're particularly exciting at the stage that we're in. In the next few months, we are going to continue some co-production workshops that we have. So it's really important as we talk about working with people with lived experience to shape policy, to shape practice. We need to do that with frontline staff, with service delivery executives, with service managers. So we're speaking with everybody about what, for example, contracts and procurement should look like going forwards. I'm trying to then build that into something that works for both parties legally and enables us to move forwards in a way that stops people chasing targets that become dated, that are based on previous practice, previous policies, or legacy contracts, but that enable them to make a difference for the individuals accessing their services. So that in itself is a big piece of work that we're working on as a priority to then start being able to distribute some money to start to fund services that are the right service for the right person at the right time. It's interesting to have those conversations with people who are experiencing the services or have, and listening to what they would build into contracts and seeing the gap between what those are and what we're chasing as targets at the moment. And for those on the call, it may not surprise you to hear that they are things like continuity and not having to share my story over and over again with a new worker, with a new service. A smile and a friendly welcome. How can we build that into a contract that we guarantee as an Alliance approved service you will receive a smile, a friendly welcome, and empathy from the person that's working with you. Not exploiting somebody's position, so with social media channels, etc. So recognizing and respecting their privacy as part of accessing that services, and knowing that homelessness is not a lifelong condition. It might be part of somebody's life story, and making sure that their access through that service can enable them to leave it behind if they choose to. So that's what we're up to over the next few months. We have some priorities to look at some specific services as well. And that's, again, working in those co-production, looking at principles and values. But do keep an eye out on the website. We hope to publish it in August, beginning of August, and there will be some clear strategic goals in there that you will see that we're working towards very soon as well. Thanks for the question. I'm going to now try and scroll down because I know we've got a few more coming in. This is a really good one. And I don't know who's best placed to answer it, so I'll let you both come in. What data is there to help ensure that we're on track in Scotland, and what else is needed? And it's a great forum to be asking that question to, hosted by the Centre for Homelessness Impact today. Maggie.
Okay, I mean, as a champion and ally of the Centre for Homelessness Impact, you know, I would always come from the basis that data could be improved. I think though the data could be improved. So there's a national you know, kind of collection mechanism, something that's called the HL1. You might hear about. It's local authorities that collect data on people that make you know, presentation to them, ask for help with their homelessness. The local authority collects that data and reports that in to Scottish Government. Scottish Government report on that frequently. It covers the types of you know, kind of data variables that you would expect in those types of exercises, but nothing more. And there are a couple of key collections within there that are probably a bit unreliable or that could definitely be improved. One is about the prevalence of people that have maybe multiple different support needs. It just doesn't capture well in that data because who goes into a local authority says, I need help with my housing and also I need help with X, Y, and Z. Do you know, it's just unrealistic and therefore underreported. And I think the other kind of maybe less reliable data within HL1 is the rough sleeping count. And it's how the question is asked, both also, you know, whether the person is willing to disclose, but it's a very, you know, specific, did you sleep rough, you know, last night or within the 3 months, and it just doesn't collect well. So there's definite improvements around about that. I think the second area very quickly that there's room for improvement in data collection is in the fact that we're now within a new policy environment for homelessness, particularly the rapid rehousing transition plans, and therefore what HL1 collects is within a historical policy context, and the fresh one is rapid rehousing, and that needs a new set of data to be collected, to be analysed, interpreted and reported on, so that we know whether we're getting better and faster, which is what the hypothesis is. So, I mean, I know there's a Scottish Government-led review of HL1 at the moment, and you expect that those types of improvements will be made, but definitely one to keep an eye on, and definitely one for the Centre for Homelessness Impact to keep their finger on as well, I think.
Thanks, Maggie. And as I'm listening to that, I'm wondering, because it relates really nicely to a question for you, Laura, and it's going to be interesting to see whether there's a dichotomy here or whether there's going to be some similarities in the data versus your answer to this question. If you could change one thing about the system tomorrow, what would it be?
I think that COVID taught us that there is an ability and that there is the funds and the means out there to end homelessness, to take people off of the streets in the most simplistic terms, and to put people into accommodation, whether that accommodation is of the quality that Maggie was talking about before and the quality that we want it to be. But there is the means to not only have people in accommodation, but to stop evictions, to in a climate where people are losing their jobs or put on furlough, and where families are under financial pressure, that we have the means as a country to end all of that, and we can house every single person in the UK. And I think that I'm admitting that and that being important, and also us as voters, as taxpayers, placing emphasis on that, and our politicians placing enough emphasis on that as well, whether that is that we persuade them to, or whether that is that they decide that that's something that they can do themselves. I think that that's the thing that that can be taken away from all of this. We have demonstrated one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that we can end homelessness. Whether it's ideal or not is a different issue, but we can.
Thanks, Laura. I'm not sure if you're reading ahead, but that's another question that we have, is how realistic is ending homelessness, particularly given the underlying economic and structural forces that drive it, often out with a direct control in Scotland. So although housing homelessness is devolved, not all of the issues that underlying causes of homelessness obviously are. And the person asking the question is highlighting that it's particularly important to think about this as we continue to deal with the economic fallout from the pandemic. So how realistic is it to end homelessness?
It is as realistic as it is to spend money on anything else, I suppose. You know, we spend millions and billions, if not on other policy areas, and this is a basic humanistic level. And when you have people in homes, and when you have people in secure accommodation, and people are able to then get into a place where they're able to access work and access services, you're creating taxpayers, I suppose, on a really cynical level, and eventually contributing back to the system. And I think that having a basic home for people is something that we have the finances to do. It is realistic, and it would be really cynically horrid to think that we would spend the money on apps and tracing services, and even, I suppose, even things like the free meals for children in schools. It's what's the point in spending money on their lunch when they're living in a grotty flat somewhere at the top of a high rise next door to a paedophile that's just come out of jail, like I was told I was going to be in? So we have that capability, why not use it?
So that's one vote for entirely possible. Thanks, Laura. Maggie?
I don't want to be the Scottish optimist, that's kind of goes against type, doesn't it? But there couldn't agree more. I mean, it really is a matter of priority, but I think it's also a matter of perseverance. You know, that so much of what we're learning and continuing to learn every day about what it's going to take to end homelessness, and so many people that are getting around the issue. And I think in the Scottish context as well, you know, the right people saying the right things and kind of being on the same page to push forward in this makes it start feeling closer and closer indeed. But that doesn't take away the substance of the question, which is, of course, it is those big structural drivers, you know, poverty, you know, the health of our housing markets and, you know, our welfare markets. But again, none of those are out with the control of someone, you know. So it becomes a matter of priority, and it becomes a matter of choice, and it becomes how coordinated a sector that cares about homelessness can become to really influence the people and the places that make the type of decisions that drive homelessness, you know. I'm talking in the Scottish context about the parliamentary debate yesterday, which really was starting to take a big chunk out those big meaty questions round about poverty reduction and what's that really going to take. It was a motion that was presented to the Parliament that was ultimately agreed across all parties in the Parliament, you know, with a couple of amendments, and that's big stuff. And that's big inspiring stuff that if we really continue to act on that, then we could start to see a lot bit of movement on those things. I mean, maybe just finally though, when there are so many people that care about homelessness, the choice becomes though do nothing or do something. So we can't get dragged down in the fact that it's a big unfathomable, you know, problem that's out with our control. We have to be prepared to do something. And what we have to be prepared to do out of all the things we could do is find the best things to do within that. And you know, centres like the Centre for Homelessness Impact and the kind of collectives that we talked about earlier on, Everyone Home, the Glasgow Alliance, these are all structures and infrastructures that can really help us move forward in the right direction and do something other than nothing. Yeah.
I really love that Maggie gets to give all the sensible answers and I get to give all the blue sky answers. This is great today. Thanks, Maggie.
No, thank you both. And I would agree, no, it's entirely possible. It's not easy, but I think it's a great aim, and it is possible. If it wasn't possible, we wouldn't have chosen that as the name of the Alliance to End Homelessness. It's not Alliance to Reduce Homelessness. It's an ambitious target, 7 years, plus the potential for 3, but we will achieve it. We're aiming towards our own redundancy, and I think that's something that a lot of people should be doing that work in this field. Now, this is a really good question, and I think it's a great one to finish on because we're down to 8 minutes left, I'm afraid, so we'll probably take the time to wrap up after this question. But we're being asked if each of us could please present a practical way to end stereotypes around people who experience homelessness. Now, I'm going to get my pen out because I'm working on my comm strategy as I speak. So please, how can we end stereotypes around people that experience homelessness?
I'm not stereotypically homeless if you meet me. I was when I was younger, but actually maybe I wasn't. Like I said earlier on, I was a girl from Mulgai, and if you know Scotland, Mulgai is not an area where people are typically homeless from. And I think that we need people to be 10% braver. Homelessness does need to be destigmatised. There is the idea still persisting. It sounds silly to all of us probably here today that homelessness is related to rough sleeping, but we know it's far more complicated than that. And so many more people, particularly women who have fled from relationships, have experienced homelessness, but there is a shame associated with it. And I think if we can address the shame and put a positive, not positive spin, but if we can make people open up like me, being 10% braver, like I say today, and talk about our experience, then that might show that there's a variety of people from all walks of life that look in all sorts of different ways who have experienced homelessness, and that might open it up a lot more.
Thank you, Laura. Maggie?
Yeah, a couple of things I kind of think. The first is that the current narrative tends to be around, you know, homelessness as a result of some personal failure, you know, and how people have chosen to live their lives. And actually what we know is that homelessness is a result of systems failure, structural failure. Those are where the failures are located, not at the personal level. And if we can find the right words to rewrite that narrative, I think that's going to be incredibly important in terms of inviting more people into the conversation round about the solutions. I think that the second message that always appeals to me and one we use quite a lot is that all homelessness starts in a community, and it absolutely does, you know, and it helps root the discussion back in all those local efforts that could actually help us, you know, prevent it earlier and much closer to home than we currently do. And that we can in some ways help prevent things before they escalate and get worse for people. So I'm really interested in bringing a kind of place-based approach to some of this conversation as well.
Thanks, Maggie. I think from my perspective, it links with a question that we haven't had time to get to, which is how might we get more people to be prepared to talk about their experience of trauma and or homelessness? So it's normalized, like it's happening in mental health, happened with the Me Too campaign. And I think from my perspective with the Alliance, it is, as you say, Maggie, providing that platform and providing access to as many stories as possible that challenge that stereotype of failure, that celebrate the resilience and the strengths that people who have experienced homelessness have gone through, that a lot of people focus on, as you said, the idea of failure and don't look at the strength, the resilience that exists there. So I think sharing as many of those stories as possible. There's that saying I'm trying to find, that there by the grace of God go I, is that it could happen to anybody. It's small things that can set off a domino effect in individuals' lives, particularly after this last year that we've had in the pandemic, that could lead it to happen to anybody. So sharing those stories and that fact that it could be any one of us, I think is one way that we can start to challenge that stereotype as well. So thank you. So we have 3 minutes. I'm gonna have a quick look now before we wrap up. There's lots happening in the chat and in the Q&A. So I believe that this is being recorded. I apologize if we haven't had an opportunity to come to your questions in the channel. I can see here that some people have offered contact to find out more about their service or parts they're interested in. So we'll make sure, the centre will make sure that you have access to the information that's posted in this channel, I'm sure. But I will finish now to say thank you for joining us. Do continue to stay in this relationship. We need to work together if we are going to end homelessness, not just across the nations, across individuals, across our organizations. At the Alliance, it's difficult to live, but we say that we'll leave our personal agenda at the door. So we're not representing our own organization when we come into the room to have the conversations about what we're going to do. But that's exactly what we need to do if we're going to end homelessness. Leave your ego, leave your individual agenda, and let's focus on those stories, that resilience, and celebrating the successes. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you to the Centre for inviting us for inviting me to chair the session, and on behalf of the panel members, inviting us to share our experiences as well. So thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Centre. I don't know how this finishes. I don't want to press leave because I'll end the recording, but I'll hand back to somebody at the Centre to do that for us. Amanda, are you there?
Thanks very much. Have a nice evening, everyone.
Thanks, Amanda.